All right, welcome to the stream, everybody. Let me switch over to this screen so y'all can see Dan Moore. Welcome to the stream, Dan. I am your host. I'm Ian Douglas. I'm the author of the Tech Interview Guide website. Got all kinds of free material on there for learning all about interview prep and career prep and getting into the tech industry, especially if you're new. If you're new to tech, there's a lot of material on there. I got a daily email series. I got a podcast. I got the stream. I got a whole bunch of archive of videos up on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe, all that stuff. I'm bad at marketing myself, but you know the drill. Smash that like button, do all the things, leave me some comments, say hi. If you're in chat on Twitch, hello. Got a handful of viewers on, so I'm excited to have Dan on the stream. So Dan, who is Dan? Dan wrote this book, Letters to a New Developer, published by A-Press, came out last August. And as soon as I saw Dan tweet, hey, I wrote a book, I'm like, hey, I bought a book. And it was great. I read it the day it came in, and I read it again recently, and it's full of really, really great advice for somebody getting into the industry brand new. Dan, welcome to the stream. Thanks for spending some time with us tonight.
Ian, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, great. So let's talk about your background a little bit. Let's hear a little bit about Dan. Can you tell us a bit about your background? Like, how did you get into tech? Like, what was your first, like, I think I want to do this programming thing?
Yeah, so the first thing that really kind of caused me to want to get into technology was I actually worked for my parents for a while. They had a small insurance brokerage, and as part of their legal requirements, they had to send out a letter a month before people's policy was going to expire. And this was in the 90s, and they basically were cutting and pasting this letter many, many times for all their clients. And they dragooned me into working for them, and I did that one or two months, and I just said there's got to be a better way. And I ended up finding a small database. It was called Lotus Notebook, I think, which is kind of like Access, super old school.
Like Lotus 123 back in the day.
I think so. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
good
So,
times.
but it was like, even I think it was like a single table structure. It wasn't like relational in any way, but you could load up people's information and mail merge it. And so the first time I did that, and I saw this task that had taken hours and days before happen at the press of a button, it really drove home to me like, oh my gosh, this software thing is something that just saves people so much time and effort and can make people's lives better. And I was hooked. I did go away to college and try to explore some other areas, but that was where I really, if I have to point to the first time that programming really like hit for me, that was it.
That's cool. I remember doing mail merge stuff in WordPerfect back in the day, like back in the early 90s, mid 90s, early 90s, I guess. Yeah, my dad came home with like Commodore 64 back in '82, and
Wow.
learning how to load up the games, and then reading through the little book that came with it. It's like when you load that game, if you type list instead of run, you'll actually see all the code. And I'm like, what? I get to see how this game was actually made. Of course, it's like thousands and thousands and thousands of lines scrolling by, and, but it was still really interesting to kind of dive in. And then back then, you had the old magazines where you would like type in all the code by hand, and
Right.
you think you're making a game, and at the end of it, it's a spreadsheet like Lotus Notebook, and you're like, oh, I just wasted all that time. But so you got kind of hooked at that point. So
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that's an interesting thing about like being able to see the code, because I think that like that is part of like in the 90s HTML was a little like that too, right? Like you could view the HTML, and I think and open source is like that now, and I think that just
right.
levels up people's learning abilities when everyone can kind of see
For
the both the source and the output. So
yeah, I think I've lost count of how many people were like, oh yeah, I totally got into programming because of MySpace, and just looking at MySpace pages and seeing how the HTML was on that, and and then the development of CSS over time, and then getting some JavaScript and stuff in there. Like all that stuff was always really exciting to a lot of people. And I think for another large percentage, probably, people our age, is like, oh, all the old video games, and like, how do you make all these little games and, platforms of, little guys jumping around, shooting a blaster at some alien or something, So, yeah, good deal. So you got into tech, and you've had a pretty long career yourself. You've been at this quite a while. Steve Avstrom, thanks for the follow. Appreciate it. How long would you say you've actually been in tech now?
So my first professional job was 99.
Okay.
I ended up starting a small consulting company that just before the dot bomb kind of craziness or
Hmm.
dot com craziness, and was there for a couple of years. Yeah, so that puts me at 22 years, I guess.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
So starting out, like when you're brand new into programming like that, what was it like getting into like a consultancy sort of contracting type of role? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I tell people if you know exactly kind of what area of CS you want to go into, or you have like a, a real big goal you want to work towards, do that. But I think small consultancies, if you aren't in that category, are great because small consultancies, they're small enough that you will be able to make an impact, right? Like no one can hide in a consultancy of 100 people because they just know that what you're doing because they're
Right.
watching their payroll and watching their billable hours very closely. Um, but it's big enough that you'll have this like breadth of experience. So you'll be able to move from project to project as opposed to being at a product company where you might end up hating the product or getting shunned aside. Like, consulting companies, they come in. Yeah, some of you may not know. I shouldn't speak. Um, I shouldn't assume things. Basically, in my mind, there's kind of two kinds of software companies. There are consulting companies where basically you're selling your hours, and then there are product companies where you're building something that is being sold. I guess there's probably a third type where you're building software to enable a business.
Mm. Yeah.
But those latter two, you're pretty much in the same code base for long periods of time, typically. Whereas consulting is much more greenfield development. That's where a company from one of those latter two categories that doesn't have the developers will hire you to come in and solve their problem. So, um, you know, it was nice for me because at a consultancy, especially when you're a newer developer, they basically hand you tasks, but they're interesting tasks and they're kind of greenfield tasks and they're exploratory tasks as opposed to fix this bug from this thing that was written in, ASP.NET 12 years ago that we need to keep the business running, which, no harm, no foul in that. It's good to write
Sure.
software that makes money, but
Yeah.
as a new developer, it's a little more exciting to be like, hey, here's this big old problem. Let's figure it out together. I'll help you and you can own small pieces of it.
That's great. I think I've said on the stream before, like if you want to make bank, go learn like COBOL and Fortran and all these languages that are still used in banks. And all those people are retiring. They're like older than Dan and I, and they're all retiring, and they got to get replaced with people that actually understand that software. So you want to make some good money? Go learn those programming languages on the side, and go explore that as a potential job.
And there is actually a new an open source version of COBOL that I've
Really,
read the documentation a couple times. It's new COBOL, and I have no idea how compatible it is with like normal COBOL.
all the old
But
mainframes and stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, good times, good times. So, I mean, you've had just a ton of experience, a ton of different roles. You've been a CTO, you've been a co-founder, you've been a director of product, uh, been in product development, you've been a principal developer, senior developer. Let's talk a little bit about like the progression. So one question that we get on the stream from time to time is like, how do I go from junior to intermediate or intermediate to senior? And I think we can kind of maybe start with a little bit of kind of the background of your book of like how to even be that junior dev and like what would that first year on the job look like. But then how do you progress from that? Like how do you grow in this industry? And maybe you can share some of your own sort of anecdotes along the way of like how do you keep your own skills sharp? I mean, you've been doing this a while. You still like to roll up your sleeves and get in there and be involved in code. How do you continue to learn yourself?
Right. So let me unpack that a little bit. So you're asking, just so I'm clear, like, are you asking like about kind of my recommendations for progression? Are you asking about
Yeah.
how I stay sharp, or do you want me to like answer that as a two-parter, or I just want to?
Yeah, I
That
guess
was
I
a
did
lot you
ask.
asked. Yeah.
I did ask like a 15-part question. Let's start with kind of let's start with the book. Actually, let's start with the book. So, what was kind of the impetus for writing the book, and then how did you sort of plan out like the advice?
Sure.
Because the book effectively maps out like this is like your first year on the job in tech. So, how did you get started writing the book and like actually coming up with the content for that book? What did that look like?
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you for breaking it down for me, Ian. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. So I wrote a book in about 2012 on technology. So it was, if anybody speaking of old technology, it's called Cordova. I think it's still around,
Mhm.
and it's a way to basically build mobile applications using JavaScript and whatnot. Ionic is kind of in the same space,
I think
and
PhoneGap, I think was their other competitor at the time, right?
no, they
Yeah.
turned into PhoneGap actually. I think
Oh, they turned
they
into
started
PhoneGap.
out PhoneGap, and then
Okay,
Adobe open sourced them, and then they turned into Cordova for
gotcha.
I don't know reasons, but. So I wrote this. The technology doesn't really matter. The point is that I actually spent a lot of time writing this book, and then after I wrote it, it was like 40 pages of an ebook about a super technical topic, like a niche of a niche technology, and I published it, and I made it like $500 or $600, which was cool, and then our company stopped using it, and I had no desire to like update the book, and so I said to myself, if I ever write a book again, first of all, I'll never write a book again. Second of all, if I ever do, it's going to be something more evergreen. And so, in about 5, 6 years later, the scars had kind of
Healed
healed,
over.
and so I was starting to look around. And at that time, I was involved in. I was a hiring manager at a company. I was actually kind of involved in a little bit of the Denver tech scene and was talking to a lot of new developers and just finding out that they were having a really hard time, and they were having a hard time finding a job. They were having a hard time like understanding the interview process. They were having a little bit of a hard time when they got the job. And I don't have anywhere near your interview experience, so writing a book about the interview process was kind of out of the norm for me. It just wasn't something that I wanted to do the research of, and I really wanted to write something about my lived experience. So I thought, well, what are the things that I wish I had known when I started out? Because you get in this career for about 20 years, and I know there's a ton I don't know, but there is a lot that I do. So I always have the anytime, not that people come to me and say I want to write books very often, but if anybody did, and actually I've told this to a few people, I always say start out, write 10 blog post topics, write titles of blog posts. Don't even write the blog posts, just write the titles.
Hmm.
And then if you can't write 10 of those, then you're not going to want to write a book about that topic. Again, for a nonfiction
Hmm.
book, right? Like a
Yeah.
fiction story, different story. And then you can start to write those. And if you write 2 or 3 and you're bored out of your mind, then you stop, right? And no harm, no foul. But I followed that process, and I ended up writing a blog for about a year and a half, 2 years before I ever thought about turning it into a book, because I just thought, well, if I keep having interesting things to say, then this might be a book, but it's going to do good in the world just by being out there as a blog. And by the way, you can go buy the book, but you can go visit the blog. I know Ian put it in the chat, and there's a significant overlap of content between them. And the blog will be up there for as long as I want to pay the hosting fee and whatnot. So that's my
That's
plan.
great.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love kind of that advice. Like if you can't write just even 10 titles of like, different kinds of blog posts, uh, you're gonna have a hard time putting a book together. I think when I, I've like you weren't the first colleague of mine that actually authored a book and actually wrote and sat down and published a book. But it kind of got me thinking like, oh, maybe I want to write a book. And I've been doing interviewing forever, and so I started writing all this stuff down, and I was giving out this gigantic Google Doc to anybody that would ask. It's like, do you have any advice on interviews? Like, yeah, here's this 50-page Google Doc on everything you ever want to know and more. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll just print that as a book. And originally I had the idea of like one side of it was, well, the whole book was going to be called My First Interview. But the way that I had planned it out is like one side of the book would be as a candidate. And if you flipped it over, it would be my first interview as an interviewer, and
Awesome.
teach like how to actually interview somebody and actually do it as like a double book. And as I got writing, I'm like, now, you know what? I'm just going to focus on like the candidate side to get started. And I was looking into self-publishing and all this kind of stuff, and I thought, you know what? As soon as I print it, it's going to be kind of out of date. As with many things in tech, I mean, I've got a library of books like all over my house of like, oh yeah, that latest and greatest technology that I used one time, and now I've got this 3-inch book that props
Right.
up my monitor instead.
Right.
Um, and like I've got tons of those books, and I didn't want to write a book that was going to go out of date, and because interviewing practices change all the time, I thought, well, I'll just publish it as an online book. and that way I can just track my Git commits, and I'll just like push that
Nice.
code up, and it's changed and it's online. But I like what you said about the impetus for your book. You wanted something kind of evergreen. You wanted something that was just always going to be there, and it was, it was grounded in enough fundamentals that it's maybe not perfectly timeless, but it's going to last a long time. Like it's just everyday things like communication and how to find tasks to work on, and how do you estimate the level of effort, and how do you approach conflict with your teams. Like that stuff's going to happen for decades and decades to
Right.
come. That's
Right.
not going away. So I love
Right.
I love when people can come up with ideas for books that like are going to last more than a typical sort of tech journal would.
Right. Right. I mean, one thing, so the couple things I want to tease out there, because that was a really interesting set of statements you made. The first is, the book is, and the blog for that matter, is not designed to be the encyclopedic reference for any of those things that you just mentioned. The beautiful thing about the internet is that once you know a concept exists, you can do as much research as you have time for now. And
Sure.
so this was really more to like, hey, here's enough to wet your whistle, and then you can dive in later. And you know, there are plenty of people who've written, tomes and done tons of research around like
Mm,
communication within teams or estimation of software processes. You just need to know that those kind of concepts exist. And again, as a new developer, you don't need to have that deep knowledge. You just need to know it exists and be able to um, do some level, like a minimal level, and then dive in more as your
yeah,
career progresses.
for sure.
The only other thing I want to say is about your book idea. I love that idea. I hope that eventually you do print it and have that, because, and this is something that I probably should add as a blog post topic. You would be astonished at how many people are horrible at interviewing, and you need to, like, as an interviewer, as an interviewee, you need to be able to like do what you can to control that. And I know you're much more of an expert than I am about that, but that's something that when I was a new developer, I was like, okay, this person interviewing me obviously has their stuff together, right?
Right.
Obviously, because they're a hiring manager.
Sure.
Why? How could they not? And then you come around and be a hiring manager, like, oh my gosh, there's an
Yeah.
interview in 5 minutes. I gotta like figure this out. So
It's like being an adult, right? Kids look up to us as adults. It's like, all the things. It's like, no, we're like winging it every day. Like, we don't know what
yeah,
to do. We don't
we're
know
just a
either.
step ahead of you. That's all we.
It's
That's
like,
all we really
yeah,
are.
yeah, we're older and have more responsibility and legal obligations now. Um, yeah, and
Totally.
it's funny that you mentioned that. I've got a whole book just on like I think it was written or published through Microsoft just on software estimation. Like you're right, you could take any one of the chapters in your book and like write a whole book just on those topics for sure. By the way, for those dropping in chat, because we had a whole bunch of viewers show up, if you got questions for Dan, you want to talk about Dan's book or just kind of the career progression of what that would look like, please drop questions in chat. I do like these live streams to be interactive, so if you got questions, we'll absolutely address those as we go. Or you can just say hi in chat. Let us know you're there. Let us know where you're from. I love kind of interacting with folks. So yeah, we'll make that part of the stream too. Um, Cool. So you started with the blog. The blog turned into the book, and you're still writing the blog. You're still adding stuff to your site all the time. Um, if you were to, so kind of the preface of this, what I wish I had known when starting my own development career. Um, how much of this, like when you go back and read, do you almost have like not quite PTSD. I think that might be a bit of an extreme emotion, but like how much of that, like how much cringe do you feel of like, oh, I wish I had known that. Like I really wish I had known that when I was getting started.
It varies, right? Like there are some things where it's just more kind of like everyone makes that mistake and you gotta like live through it, because that's the only real way to understand it. And even if I warn you about it, you're still gonna make that kind of mistake.
Sure.
And then there are other things where I do wish that someone had taken me aside and been like, hey, this is really important. Spend some time on this. And, example of that latter category is just the interpersonal communication and how important that is. I think I wrote a chapter about going to lunch with your colleagues
Mm-hmm.
and how important that is, and how I was, saving money, eating my own
Eating your
lunch that I
PB and
brought.
J. Yeah.
Yeah, PB&J, and I'm not saying that you have to go out and spend lunch, buy lunch every day. People have different financial situations, but when you build those interpersonal communications in a non-work but still work-related environment, when things like you need to talk to someone in a different department, or you have a question you don't even know who to start to talk to,
Mm.
you can lean on those people, or you need something from somebody,
Yeah.
right? Who is it easier to give something that is a little bit of a pain in the butt of a issue to, of a solution to? Well, the person who's friendly with you, or the person that you just work with that as an email address, right? Well,
Yeah.
I know which is easier for me. So
Yeah, for sure. I was doing some mentoring over the past week with someone and helping them get a little bit better at behavioral questions in interviews. And they said, well, I haven't had a lot of experience working as part of a team. And I said, well, the thing with those kinds of behavior questions is that it really comes down to how are you communicating as a team? Because communication will lead to trust, and trust leads to better communication, which then leads to better trust, which leads to better communication. Like it's this back and forth kind of thing, and it's not like one or the other, but they play very nicely together in kind of this feedback loop, like we would talk about with agile, of like try a thing, get some feedback, make a change, try a thing, get some feedback, make a change. And it's kind of the same thing with communication on a team. Like it and I mean, I've certainly been at a lot of companies where it's like, hey, like a bunch of us are going to go out for lunch, and like a couple of people kind of hang back. It's like, why don't you come with us? It's like, oh no, I'm good. It's like, no, like get off your butt, come with us for lunch. Like sometimes you have to be that one, like welcoming people. It's not always comfortable for someone to just kind of invite themselves along.
sure.
But those kinds of like just team dynamics make for such a better team experience, which then just kind of unravels all this other cool stuff about working on a team. Um, and for a lot of folks, coming out of like CS degrees, where they may have like maybe one or two like group projects, they sometimes struggle answering those kinds of questions because they haven't really worked on a team. And they've worked on things mostly solo, which, in today's age right now, working solo on a lot of stuff proves that you're probably going to make a good remote employee because they can trust you're going to get something done. But I think there's still team dynamics that have to come into play. And so trying to find how to do that in a remote world, I think is going to be kind of tricky as well. So
Definitely no.
yeah.
I mean, lots to unpack there. I mean, I would say for the people that are, coming out with CS degrees and whatnot, like my guess is that you've done something in a group, right? And so I'm sure that you told them this too, right? Like you can lean on other things, because that's the nice thing is software. There are parts of software that are unique to software, right? Like,
Yeah.
there aren't too many other jobs where you're like building parsers, right? Or, UX design, although there is overlap with other professions, but the team stuff, if you're a team trying to put together a big software project, you have a lot of overlap with people who are trying to build a house, or people who are trying to launch a company. There's a lot of
Yeah.
different overlap there. So
Yeah, for sure. We had a really good point brought up in chat. Heartbender says, I've been at my first dev job for a year and a half. I haven't been mentored once yet. I wish my seniors sat down with me once a week so I could pick their brain. What kind of advice would you give? Like, so maybe let's dive in a little bit. Like, what would you expect somebody's first year, or what would you say? Like, I hope this is what your first year would look like.
yeah.
How would you encourage like someone like Heartbender to kind of get that ball rolling as far as like, hey, I really want some mentorship and I really want some growth? What would you recommend for them?
Yeah, it's a great question, Heartbender. Thanks for asking it. So, the unfortunate thing is a lot of this is context dependent. So I'm going to kind of give you my gut, and then I think I need you to kind of respond and say, well, this might not work, or maybe not even respond, but just pick out what works for you and what doesn't work for you, right? Because lots of times I think this gets back to the adults comment that Ian made a little bit ago. We expect people to have their stuff more together than they actually do. And so if you're in a company where you've been there for a year and a half, I got news for you. There's like no program coming, right? Like it's not like they're working on it. Probably if it's been a year and it's one thing if you don't get any mentorship in the first month, but a year and a half. So I think you need to start to look for those opportunities. And what does that look like? Well, again, it depends on the situation, right? If you're in a consulting company, then maybe it's when you talk about a project with a senior person, or a particular problem that you're working on that's billable, you say, hey, could we pair on this? If it's a product thing, then maybe you look for a ticket that's maybe just beyond your skill set, and then you reach out to a you can do get blame, and you can see who worked on that component before, and then reach out to them and just say, hey, do you have 10 minutes? Um, I do want to say that there are services out there, free ones, that will give you mentorship outside of your work environment. I think those are a good option. Those are going to be less kind of closely tied to the problems you're working on. And I think that
Yeah.
at the level, if this is your first dev job, and I think you did say, yeah, it is your first dev job, it's probably better for you to spend that time kind of getting better within the domain that you're currently in. So if you have any possibility at all to open up those conversations with the with the seniors, um, final thought would be take him to lunch, right? Like, that's cheap. I don't think you need to take him to lunch every week, but that can be a good way to start that conversation, start that relationship, and make them that much more likely to be able to respond to your Slack message or your emails.
Yeah. One thing that I typically tell people is like find a mentor at work, but also find a
Mm.
mentor outside of work, because otherwise you can end up putting blinders on and think that this is the only possible way to do something. But if you have a mentor outside of work, they can sometimes give you a bit more of an objective view on things.
Mm.
One thing I might recommend, Heartbender, is ask the other folks on your team, like, hey, could we start like a lunch and learn where like we just pick a topic and like somebody come and like just, it could be on anything. It doesn't have to be work related. Just like, hey, if you're like geeking out on something at home, or you got like a Raspberry Pi that you're doing something cool with, could you like come in and just talk about that, and like let's just kind of nerd out on something for a little while. Sometimes that can get the ball rolling, and just be able to ask questions of one another. Again, I think it comes down to that trust of, we can just have conversation of just like, oh, cool, tell me how that part works. Like, how'd you get into that? Like, and start to build up that rapport.
Mm.
It's easier said than done, for sure. But I think that the overall premise, it really comes down to that communication and trust. Like, how are you communicating as a team? How are you communicating to your team that you need this?
Mhm.
Um, I mean, ideally, yes, the company would have said, hey, here's our mentorship plan and here are all the steps. But like Dan and I are talking about, like, we think that the company is going to have things all together and be able to plan that kind of stuff, but sometimes they don't. And so you have to be able to have good communication with your manager or team lead and say, hey, this is something that I feel that I'm lacking. Like, I think by kind of promoting it in a way that says like, hey, I want to do the best job I possibly can here. I think it's too easy to just say, you know what, this job sucks, I'm out. I got a year and a half experience, I'm just going to go find a job somewhere else. I think it's a whole new level of respect to say like, hey, you know what, I've been here a year and a half, I still really like it here, I want to stay working here, I want to grow, I want to learn how this component works, I want to learn how these things intercommunicate. Like, who can I talk to on the team that knows these things? And you're gonna have to make that happen for yourself, kind of like Dan said. I think you're gonna have to figure out a way to make that opportunity happen, and it's gonna feel awkward, and that's okay. It's okay that it feels awkward. I think that's how that's going to build up on the team. And whether it's a work related topic or just outside of work, like, hey, who's like writing some code on the side? You doing anything with React these days? Or, hey, does anybody know about functional programming? I've been kind of like dabbling with it a little bit. If anybody wants to like hang out over lunch and just chat about it, or, or say, tell them like, hey, I'm thinking about doing like a 10-minute lightning talk at a meetup about a topic. Like, could I come and do that at lunch and get all of your feedback on it? Like, maybe ask me some questions, or I can ask some of you for input, something along those lines, just to get that communication started. I think that might be a good way to get that rolling. And then hopefully that'll continue to grow. And then if the company grows and they bring new people on, I think there might be opportunity then to make that kind of a company norm of like, hey,
Right.
new guy or new person coming in on the team. It's like, hey, we got this lunch and learn thing. You're up for a topic. So find a topic. You're bringing your own background and experience. So bring a topic of something that you want to teach us about that, you're super passionate about. It's like a 10-minute talk. Just, we're all going to bring our own PBJ, or we're going to order in a pizza or something. And, just nerd out on that.
Yeah, and I would say two things. One is, that initiative that you show, even if it ends up not um, results in the kind of mentoring that you really want. Like that initiative is a muscle, and that's actually a beautiful thing to develop in your career, because
Hmm.
to be able to say, hey, I have this thing that I want, and I'm going to go find ways to make that happen, right? And especially if it's low cost ways, but even if it's not low cost ways, sometimes managers are busy, and they just need you to present them a nice bundle that you can say, hey, we're going to do lunch and learn, and guess what, you're going to buy lunch for everybody once a month,
Yeah.
and it's going to be a great team building thing. Managers are much more likely to do that than if you say, hey, I want mentoring, and then you just put
Mhm.
it all on the manager, and the manager's like, well, guess what, I have 10 other things that are on fire right now. And then the other thing is, I would say that people, I think Ian's really wise, like people love to talk about themselves, right? Like I like to talk about myself, Ian, you
Yep.
do too, like play on that, right? Like don't make it about like learning something from somebody, because they will learn things when they teach you as well, but make it a kind of a mutual benefit rather than just like you needing to absorb their time. I was on a call today with a guy who's pretty new in our company, and you know, we still, like, even though I've had 20 years of experience and he's had 1 year professional software experience, like we still learn things from each other.
Mhm.
And
Absolutely.
that's something that you have value, um 100%, even for the most senior developers
Yep.
in your
They
company.
can always learn something from you, if nothing else, like just that energy that you're bringing to the team that maybe they don't have anymore because they're like old and cranky like me. Um, Dan, what would you say was like the favorite chapter that you wrote in that book about like getting started in the career, and like like your favorite piece of advice that you like to give out the most?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that this ties back to um, your comment about adults, and it's a short bit. Actually, so there's probably two. So the first is that there are no adults in the room, and so this ties back to that idea that hey, it's a theme. Uh, when you start out, when I started out, I shouldn't speak for everybody else. When I started out, I thought I would walk in and people would hand me chunks of work, and they would know exactly what they were building, and uh, they would have all the budgets, they would have all the sales process nailed down, like everything would be put together. And that may happen some software companies somewhere, but in 20 years I haven't been there where everything is buttoned up. And that's part of the joy of software, right? The chaos, and the fact it's a young profession, the fact that we can all contribute and push the ball forward is really a joy, right? I don't actually want to be a cog in machine. That doesn't interest me very much. But it means that you gotta start to take responsibility, and you have to start, like, taking small bits of responsibility when you're new, and more responsibility as you get more experienced. That's the first piece, and the second piece was how, and this was something that I don't have a lot of direct experience with. I can think of a couple people that fit this category, but there are programmers out there that don't know how to program, and that is a frustrating fact of life that I think is I would be frustrated if I were in their position. They are in their position. I haven't really delved into why, but I think it's worthwhile for you to know about that and prepare yourself for it, because it was a shock to me when that happened.
How do you
So,
think people promote and stay in these kinds of roles if they don't know programming? Like how would somebody super senior make it that far if they didn't know how to code?
I don't know whether they did and then it just kind of stopped, or whether they bounced from company to company and just got hired for like a year each time. The one person I'm thinking of in particular, like, seemed like they had skill set in like technology A, and then they were kind of shunted into technology B, and that's where I encountered them, and they just never really took to technology B. So it could be company loyalty, right? I
Yeah.
mean, which in some sense is a good thing, but also can, if you don't force people to progress, then they can end up in a situation where, frankly, I thought they were pretty unhappy, right?
Mhm.
Because they basically needed me to handhold them through this entire project. And I was a contractor. And that's one thing that might be worth mentioning is, when you're a contractor, you can put up with a lot more BS than when you're an employee, because you're getting paid by the hour. And I was not thrilled, but I wanted to get that goal done. But if it'd been my team member, that would have been a really frustrating experience.
Interesting. I've said on the stream before, if you've watched the stream, try not to get tied to a technology. Like there are people out there that are like, I'm all in on Ruby on Rails, and that's the only thing I ever want to work in. But if you go work at a company and the company's like, yeah, we decided we don't want to do Rails anymore, we're gonna like start shifting over to like a microservice architecture, or we're gonna port everything over to Django and Python or something. Are you going to quit that job, or are you going to stick around and like try to learn that thing and sort of stretch yourself? And I think that this is something that is probably particularly of interest for Dan and I. You know, we've been in the industry for Dan for 20 and me for 25 years. How do we keep our own skills sharp? Like, what are we learning these days, and how are we progressing in our own career? Because you sign up for tech, you're signing up for lifelong learning. Like, there's always going to be something new to learn. There's always a new language. There's always a new framework. There's always a new way of doing things. And I've said on the stream too, I remember interviewing at Yahoo back in, I think, 2006 when it was cool to work at Yahoo. And they're like, yeah, go learn about, like, I was asking, what should I study? And they're like, go learn about design patterns. I'm like, what's a design pattern? So I bought a book and I'm reading it on the flight up going, I've coded like this all along, but somebody's put a fancy title on it. It's like, oh, you just call that a factory pattern, okay? Or oh, you call that a singleton. Well, yeah, of course you would build it that way.
Sure.
And you know, we've been doing this so long, and find out that somebody slaps a title on it. But you know, you can get stumped. Like we can get stumped in an interview where they're like, "Oh, tell me about such and such design pattern." You're like, "What? Like, what's that?" You know. So we also have to stay sharp on our skills. Dan, what's the latest thing that you've learned?
Yeah, so actually I've had the luxury of this new position I'm in. I'm in developer relations, and so I've been both learning the skills of developer relations, which are slightly different than that of being a coder, and then I've also had the luxury of diving into the domain, which is authentication and authorization.
Oh, cool.
And so there's a world there that as a software developer I knew existed and I kind of like plugged into occasionally, but there's just so much depth in that authentication authorization that I've been digging into.
Yeah, that's great. I've been so part of you know running the live stream and everything. I've actually been diving into how to automate some of you know the video splitting and like
Mm.
merging on like intros and outros and extracting the audio and doing like overlapping audio and fade outs and fade ins for the music and things like that for the
Awesome.
podcast, and just finding ways of automating that stuff is pretty fun. You know, kind of like you back in the day with the Lotus notebook is like, there's got to be an easier way to do this. You know.
Well, and I think that actually is a really, really interesting kind of segue because we talk about staying sharp, and if you're in a job where you're doing Ruby on Rails, you're going to need to keep doing Ruby on Rails, and there's a lot of scope to learn there, right?
Mhm.
But it can be really fun to do something that's low pressure, and for a long time, I've had side websites where I could introduce new tools or
Cool.
try new frameworks or try new, you know. Uh, I didn't really try. I guess I've tried some new languages a couple of times too, and that's a great way to do low pressure stuff, right?
Yeah,
Because
for sure.
all the fun stuff you're doing with your videos, like that's all professionally valuable in some professional
Yep.
sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
For sure. Awesome. We got another question in chat from LaCroix Boy. When looking at potential candidates' portfolio, what kind of projects really stand out, or what would you recommend somebody entering it into the field focus their time on?
Yeah. So, and I'm gonna give my 2 cents. I will say that I have helped some junior developers get jobs, but I have nowhere near the breadth that Ian does, right? So my focus in the book is really succeeding after you get the job. But the easiest job to get is the one where they know you, right? And so I think the portfolio is important and you need to be look competent. I think I would focus on targeting people and targeting companies that you want to work for, because I think that the sending out the resume to 1,000 or 2,000 companies, the honest truth is that when I was a hiring manager and we put out a call for a junior developer, we got 200 resumes in like 2 days. and we were not a name, right? You wouldn't have heard of us. I just published on some Slacks, and and so what you really need to do is target some companies and build a relationship. And then when you're one of those 200 resumes, well, you actually hand it to the hiring manager and they say, okay, that doesn't mean you're going to get the job, but it means that you're going to stand out among that sea of folks.
Yeah,
So,
that's good.
meetups are great for doing that. Just emailing the hiring, finding the hiring manager and emailing them and asking them about a technology that they use, not about the job, right? There's a saying that says, ask for advice when you want money and ask for money when you want advice. And
Ooh,
you're looking for money, right? You're looking for a job. You want to ask people for advice, and then they will give you advice. And again, it may not turn into a job right away. And I get when you're like, I've been on the job hunt where I was like, I got to take one of the first things I see because it's my financial situation or whatnot. I understand that, but if you can take the time to try to build relationships, it's going to be super, super helpful. So
yeah,
that
that's
was a
great.
bit of a
No,
ancillary
it's
way.
great.
Yeah, but I think that portfolio shows confidence, but like building a relationship is going to get you in the door.
Yeah, I think networking is like one of the key things to getting a job, especially that first job. I mean, I've dealt with a lot of folks, not just through the stream, but just mock interviewing and working at Turing for 4 years. Like getting that first job is a really horrible experience. Like our whole interview system's kind of broken and needs an overhaul. And companies need to be friendlier about bringing new developers onto the team. All that aside, it really does come down to relationships, like Dan was saying. Like find people to talk to, get to know them, and go build a project like what they do, or go build a technology, or go build a project based on a technology that they say they're using. Now you're a better candidate. I was actually doing a workshop earlier today, and one of the things that I told folks is like when you're doing research on these companies that you want to go work at, see if they have a library or a tool or an API or something like that, and build that into your project. Because now when you apply, it's not just like, hi, I'm Dan and I've got these technical skills. You're like, hi, I'm Dan. I'm a user of your system. I love this so much. I want to be part of your team and help like contribute to this. Completely changes the narrative of that application, especially if you've gotten to know them and you're kind of like keeping them up to date on like, hey, I said I was working on that project a month ago. Here's the progress that I've made. And I've done this. Do you have any recommendations? Like, do you have any like feature ideas that I could implement and maybe get your feedback on? Like, could you do a code review on just this little bit of code? I think that kind of stuff is really powerful. I saw a post on LinkedIn maybe a year or so ago, and it was a hiring manager, and they're basically writing it kind of like, dear new developer, a little bit similar to how Dan writes his book. It was like, I appreciate that you reached out and wanted to network about that job post that I just posted the other day, but I've already got 300 applications, so I don't even have time to network with you. And it kind of brings up this idea of if you see a job post, it's almost too late to network. You need to network before they even get a job post up, because you want to be on their mind when they post that job and go, oh, remember that Dan? Remember Dan was working on that project? Like, should we just call Dan about like coming on the team? Like, that's what you want to have happen.
Yeah.
And it's hard to do. It's hard to do. I'm not saying it's like the easiest thing, but if you can build that rapport and build that relationship with a company that you really want to work there, you can kind of knock their socks off and go like, this is me, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm going to be like as an employee, this is how I'm going to stay in touch and communicate and so on. You're going to be on their mind when they're like, we need to bring someone else in on the team. What about that Dan? Like, let's give Dan a call. Let's see, like, yeah, Dan doesn't know all the things that we would typically need to hire for, but they're moldable, they're shapeable, they can be the engineer we want them to be, right? And that can win them over.
Well, I'd say two more things. One is, I think sending people information that is helpful to them, again, is just another way to stay top of mind, right? Like, so suppose it's
Sure.
a React library that you're helping, like that you're using. You don't need to necessarily send them updates about what you've done. You could just say, hey, I saw this other React library did it this way, and I don't know whether that's something that you all have considered, but that
Hmm.
shows that you're thoughtful. And the
Sure.
other thing I would say is there's a spectrum, right? The spectrum is, on the far side is, you're just a name and an email address and a resume, right? And then there's the other spectrum of like, okay, I want Dan, right? He is the world-class expert in XYZ. Well, as a new developer, you're probably not going to be there, right? But you want to move down that spectrum to be more close to what you, there's a concept called fungibility, right? Which is like a dollar bill is fungible or gallon of gas is fungible. Guess what? You don't want to be fungible. Being fungible is not a good place to be. You want your labor to be fungible. You want your labor to be special and specific, and that will happen over time as you get more experience, just naturally. But you want to do that as much as you can early, to make sure that they want you or someone like you. They don't just want someone who can code React for this rate at this many hours a week.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Cool. Question from Crookie Monster. Excuse me. What platforms or ways do you learn about events in the area besides Slack? Would it be beneficial to go to any and all just to learn about different technologies? How would you go about finding a mentor? Sorry for so many questions. I would say first and foremost, they're called meetups for a reason, not show ups. Like you got to go to meet people. And you know, over the last year and a half, they've obviously been a lot more remote. But some meetups are starting to meet back in person again. And I think that, you know, definitely going to with the intent of I'm going to go meet 2 people. I don't care who they are. I don't care what their skill level is. You know, if you're shy like me, that's okay. I mean, I can put on a facade of being outgoing and like, hey, what's going on? Do this with your resume. I'm out, and I'm like cringing in my car on the way home. But I think, you know, go to a meetup. Give like a 5-minute lightning talk on this was my experience learning React. You know, you'll be surprised how many people want to come and talk to you. Even though you're a new dev, even though you're new in the industry, volunteer to give like a 5-minute, 10-minute talk of this was my experience learning X. You're not getting up there and saying this is how to use X. You're saying this is my experience in what I learned. You're going to have a ton of people come up to you afterwards and go, what about this? What about this? You should look into this. Oh, if you liked that, you should do this other thing. You're going to get so many people. And Dan, I'm sure that, you know, because you're really involved in the meetup scene up in Boulder. Tell us kind of your experience around like the community and how you were managing like the remote with the Ruby group up in Boulder, and like running meetups and stuff like that. What's your experience there?
Yeah, so actually, I help run the Boulder Ruby meetup, and I will say a couple of things, right? Like, I think that Ian's absolutely right that you can go do a lightning talk, and most of the meetups, I've actually been reaching out to a lot of meetups to do talks for my job, and I would say 80% of them are thrilled to have me contact them, right? And so I know that I would be thrilled if someone came to me and said, "Hey, I have a 5 to 10 minute talk I want to give." Uh, so absolutely suggest doing that if you feel comfortable doing that. If you don't, going to a meetup, you know, doing it on Zoom is tougher for sure. But there's still, we at the Boulder Ruby meetup, we actually start at like 6ish, and then 6:30 is when the talks start, and we actually sit and talk socially. And so it would be hard the first couple of times that you show up, right? Because it's hard to break in, but you can start to learn to know people and see who shows up time and time again. Uh, the something actually I wrote about in my book is called a conversational hook. And so when you're meeting somebody for the first time, your job is to give them something to like talk about. And you can say, "Hey, I'm working on XYZ. What are you working on?" And that lets them choose where they want to take the conversation. They can either choose to talk about what they're working on, right? And they know, like if you say I'm working on React, that's a different conversation. If you say I'm working on a Go microservice or I'm working on a database, right? Like, and that so gives them something to say, to respond to. And they may choose to say, "Oh, this person's working on a Go microservice. I'm working on a Ruby microservice. We're going to talk about that." Or they may choose to dig deeper into what you have. But what you don't want to do is say, "Hey, I'm Dan. I work at Fusionoth, and Ian, nice to meet you. You work at Stream," and then you're just kind of like, you know, and it's cricket. So your job is to give people things to latch onto, and then offer them a chance to talk about themselves. Again, people like to talk about themselves, so
Yeah.
give them a chance to do so.
It's funny that you mentioned like, oh, Ian works at Stream and then getting crickets. That's usually what I get when I tell people I work at Stream. They're like, what's Stream?
Right.
We by the way. We're not sponsored by Stream, but this is our little 3D printed logo over here in the corner. We
Nice.
make it. We make APIs for integrating news feeds and activity feeds in your application. So check out getstream.io. We've got a free hacker account that you can sign up for to kind of tinker with what we do. Yeah, Prime Academy in the house. Appreciate everybody hanging out with us. So what platforms are ways about events? So Slack communities are a really great way. I typically would start with just like meetup.com and just look for a topic in some radius within of whatever metro area that I'm in, and then I would find out from people there like, hey, how did you hear about this meetup? Or meetup.com, they've actually got like community forums that you can kind of reach out to people and say like, hey, Dan, I see that you're part of this community. I just joined. I'm kind of new in the area, or I'm new in tech, and I'm getting to know people. Like, what other meetups would you recommend? You can certainly ask that. Ask the people that run the meetups. They're going to know all kinds of other people that run meetups as well, and they'll be able to help with introductions too. And then from there, like Dan, I ran a Python meetup up in Boulder for several years, and so I got to know some other meetup, founders and so on. And from there, it's like, oh, there's a Slack community called Denver Devs. It's this massive community now. And so like there's always going to be some side Slack community or Discord community or something like that you can get into where you can just like commiserate on whatever. Like, oh, I did this interview and totally bombed, or oh, I'm working on this bit of code and it's like giving me a lot of grief. You're going to find a lot of people that you can interact with for sure. Yeah.
And I would actually say, like, I think there's like a bunch of different kinds of Slacks, right? Like you said Slacks in general, but there are technology focused Slacks, and sometimes they have location specific channels, right? And that can be a really great way to find interesting content and interesting events.
Yeah, for sure. Another question we had in chat: what if we networked in person at multiple face-to-face meets and had several emails with the person? How long between emails or calls before I reach out to them again? I think it depends a little bit on the rapport that you're building with them, but I think you could also kind of set that frequency too and say like, hey, Dan, would you mind if I check in with you like every 2 or 3 weeks? And we'll just like stick something on the calendar once a month. If you can find like 2 or 3 people and meet with them once a month, you could fill up one a week and just meet with a new mentor every week, for the entire month. And then like give yourself a week off to like kind of recharge. And come up with other questions or other things that you want to talk about. But keep all those mentors up to date on like, hey, I'm working on this project. Like, could you code review like this one function for me? I'm trying to figure out, can I make it smaller? Can I make it better? Can I optimize something about it? If you say like, hey, here's my 5,000 line project, could I get a code review? They're going to say no. But if you say, hey, I got like this 10 line function, like something's going on, like it seems to be a bottleneck, or I'm curious whether this is my bottleneck. Could you eyeball this for me? Everyone's going to tell you, yeah, if it's small. Sure. And it's okay to ask for those kinds of favors. So as far as the frequency, I would say like once a week probably works out well for most devs, where it's not feeling like you're overwhelming them constantly asking for questions. And if you can find several people and kind of like spread them out over the course of a month, you're going to have constant mentorship and constant growth yourself without making your mentor feel exhausted. That would be my 2 cents. Dan, any thoughts on frequency?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only other thing I would add, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think the most important thing is to have an open conversation about it. And you could even preface it by saying, hey, this is kind of awkward for me to ask, but I want to make sure that, we're both on the same wavelength here. And if you need me to, take more time, increase or decrease our frequency, that's fine. The other thing I would say is I think it's really important and scary sometimes, but doing all that stuff in public, right? And so don't just say, hey, could you code review this? Say, actually, I wrote this Stack Overflow question, and I, wondered if you could like take a look at that too, right? Because that, you don't have to do that for every single one, but I think that one heightens your profile, it sharpens your skills. Absolutely. And then it also shows them that you've done some extra work again outside of it, right? So it all kind of snowballs, but I think once a week, I guess the last thing I would say is it depends on what your ask is once a week, right? Sure. If you're sending me an interesting article once a week, I'm okay with that if it's tuned
Yeah.
into me, right? Like, not that you're sending me random stuff, but you're sending me in things I'm interested in. If you're asking me to code review 100 lines of code and we met at a meetup once, well then that's a little bit of heavier of an ask. So
Right.
you
For
want
sure.
to tune that to kind of what the relationship can handle.
Yep. Speaking of asks, if you ever want a resume review, there's a way on techinterview.guide/streaming. You can send me over an anonymized resume review, and I'll review it live on the stream. And sometimes I have folks like Dan like help me out and be like, "Hey Dan, let's do a resume review," just to hear different perspectives on that kind of stuff. And so I dropped a thing in chat about where you can upload a PDF for that. And if you ever want to connect with me on LinkedIn, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to make introductions to people like Dan, and just others in the tech community. Any way that I can kind of help build up community.
Are you
Yeah, go
still
ahead,
doing
Dan.
your email course?
Yeah, so I've got the daily email series, and that runs for 6 weeks. So you can find that on techinterview.guide. Just look for the daily email series. Dan actually subscribed himself and gave me a bunch of
I
feedback
did.
on grammar and and content, which is great. I always
Really enjoyed
appreciate
it.
that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love getting feedback on that stuff. Dan, I'm actually going to be splitting that into two different lists. I'm
Okay.
going to focus one on just technical questions and the other on just behavioral questions.
Awesome.
Because I think I've got enough content now that I could fill up, maybe not full 6 weeks, but maybe go in a little bit deeper on some of those kinds of questions kind of as we go. So
Awesome.
there was another follow-up question from LaCroix Boy. Would you say virtual networking is as effective as in real life networking? What would you think about just connecting over Slack or connecting over LinkedIn? Do you find that's as effective as like actually going to a meetup and meeting someone in person?
So here's the thing, it's different, right? Like everything's different. So it's more tenuous, but the pool's wider.
Sure.
So it's actually fascinating because you can actually ask questions. And I've seen, like, I'm on some Slacks where I've been able to ask questions of people who I never would have been able to go to a meetup with, right? Or I never would have been able to be at a conference with except for watching them up on the stage. And they could actually respond to my questions, or I could send them a DM. So in that aspect, it's actually better. In the aspect of like actually building like a real solid relationship, like would I go out to beers with any of these people? No,
Mhm.
right? Whereas the people I've met at the meetup, I would and have gone out and done like
Sure.
social things with them. So if you want to build like if it's a long-term play and you want to build a reputation, I think online is really good. There are definitely communities out there that you can get access to people that you wouldn't have access to, and you can show expertise in a public way that you couldn't at a meetup. But the connections are going to be much more tenuous. So I guess that's a consultant's answer. It depends.
Yeah. Yeah, it depends. That's our favorite term when we're giving advice. So,
Yeah.
oh yeah, someone said, "Do you do off-stream resume reviews?" And I do, and they're like, "Oh, I'm too shy." So someone said, "Just put someone else's name on there." Yeah, just put Dan's name on there. Dan won't mind.
Totally.
Yeah. No, I do ask, like, if you want a resume review on the stream, like, anonymize your name, anonymize your links and things like that. Just because I do spend a lot of time kind of like going through all the bits and pieces, and I don't want to like dox anybody with your real phone number and your real email address and stuff like that. That's not great. I actually did a I did a resume review for somebody on the stream maybe 2 months ago, and I saw their phone number on there. I'm like, oh no, they've got like the real phone number. So I'm like, I kept trying to
Whoa.
pan away from that part of the resume all the time. And it wasn't until after the stream that I DM'd them. I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, I saw your phone number on there, and like, they're like, you didn't actually look at the phone number, did you? I'm like, why? And they're like, it was 8675309. I'm like, oh, I should have caught that. I'm old enough to have known, the song, right? Uh, so yeah, good times, good times.
That's great. That's
It's
great.
not $500 off stream. I have asked for $50, but if you're at a code school, I'll do them for free. So yeah, for folks at Prime Academy, I'm happy to help out with resume reviews. But it's also fun to do them on the stream, especially when I can have somebody like Dan hang out, or someone else, where you can hear multiple perspectives. The very first stream I did back in July, I had Jonan on the stream, and Jonan's got a really great show. You can follow him on Twitch at the Jonan Show.
Hmm.
And he's also on Twitter, and also really great community builder, loves helping people out and building community around him and helping people out in every way, shape, and form. great person. You need to get to know Jonan. But I had Jonan on the show, and we did one resume review, and it took us like an hour or an hour and a half to go through this resume. Like, it just went on and on and on because we had such conflicting ideas on this belongs on a resume. No, it doesn't. This belongs on a resume. No, it doesn't. You should put this first. No, you should put this first. And I think as confusing as that can be for the person whose resume we were reviewing, I think it goes to show you there's no one right way to make a resume. Like, you're going to get so many opinions on how to do interview prep, how to write a resume, how to write a cover letter, how to get ready for the interviews, what you should study, what you shouldn't bother studying, what kinds of leak code challenges should you do, shouldn't do, should you do this instead. You're going to have so many differing opinions. And I think that, like a lot of things in life, the more perspectives you hear, the more you can kind of form your own path. And I was telling some folks today, like, working in tech is really a choose your own adventure book where you can decide what you want to do, but you need the input first. And so the more opinions you can hear, the better you can kind of form, like, okay, well, I've listened to all these pieces of advice, and this is how I'm going to move forward from there.
Well, I just want to like say two things that came out of listening to what you just said. Like, the first is choose your adventure is so true. Like if you're working as a compiler developer at Intel, that's a totally different world than if you're working at a small consulting company doing
Sure.
web dev. And I saw on Slack today that someone was talking about, like, they were talking to companies about a 3-day week, right? So they're trying to find
3-day
companies
week.
that are
Wow.
yeah, 3-day week, yeah. So you really, and this was a senior person, it was
Sure.
a specialty, but like, you can build that thing. The other is the same thing that Ian was saying about the interview process is true for companies as well. And I have been at companies where I sorry, I have seen people at companies that succeeded wildly at one company that did not succeed or almost got fired at other companies. And so that's one thing to be aware of when you keep interviewing, is that and I'm sure you've used this analogy, and it's a little bit like dating, right? Like, it's got to be kind of a mutual match, and it's very, very easy, at least it is for me, to blame myself when a company doesn't want me. Why don't you want me? Why don't you want me? Well, the honest truth is that it might not have been a fit, and they have a little more perspective, and so they may not have seen that, but there will be a fit, I guess, is what you gotta believe. And every time that I guess what I want to say is, like, I am a people pleaser, and when I interview, I want that job so bad, and then sometimes you realize that it actually was the perfectly wrong job for you. So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, good times. And I mean, you've changed your kind of role in tech quite a lot. You've been a programmer, you got into product, you've been a manager, you got back into programming. Um, how did you kind of decide what path you wanted to take? Like, how did you kind of level up in your career and then decide, like, I want to try not coding for a while? What was that decision point for you in your career?
yeah, I mean, I think I would say that I've never so I've always wanted to code, right? The question is just really, is coding the primary focus of your career? And I think the further away you get from the start of your career, you can either kind of double down and get super technical, or you can look for other ways to leverage yourself, right? So uh, I mean, the honest truth is, the more expensive you get, the more leverage you need to provide to justify your salary. And so the ways that I can see you can provide leverage are, one, being super technical about something, right? The example of this is the people who know how to, like, optimize MySQL queries, right? You could make an entire career out of optimizing MySQL queries, and you would just be a consultant moving from from database fire to database fire. Another way you can do it is be a people manager, right? And that you're starting to compile teams together. Another way you can do it is be a teacher, or the kind of thing that Ian's doing, right? And by doing this, you're actually helping everybody else get better, whether that's within a company or outside a company. So at a certain point in my career, I realized that I didn't want to head down that deeply technical path, and so I started to look at other ways to do that, other ways to get that leverage. And where I ended up was that writing and teaching around a specific technology was really interesting to me, because it lets me still code, but also do things that are higher leverage. And there's actually a great I don't even remember the blog post I saw it in, but it basically said if you want to be the best programmer in the world, the best C programmer, you're gonna compete. You're gonna have a really hard time competing because there's so many people out there. But if you're the best C programmer and you're a good teacher, then suddenly you don't have to. You can be
That pool is much smaller.
25% of both of those. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You can be top 25% of both of those, and the intersection is you're going to be great and in need. So think about what other skills you have that you can bring along with coding, because coding is really kind of like the reading, writing, arithmetic of the future. And so other things that you can bring along with it mean that you won't have to, again, your labor won't be fungible. You'll be somebody who brings an extra spice to the kitchen, I guess.
Yep. Be a little extra. I think that's what we're saying.
There you are.
No, and the other point I want to make, and I agree with everything that Dan just said. The other thing I want to emphasize, though, is you don't have to have a really long career in tech in order to teach. You can facilitate these kinds of things. You could start that lunch and learn, similar to what we were saying with that advice. Like, you can find other ways of just, you know what, I don't know a ton about this technology, but here's what I have learned, so let me teach you that. You know, and you might have other people come to that lunch and learn that know way more about it than you do, but you know, there's always the off chance that you're going to present something in just a slightly different way, or you're going to teach them something that maybe they hadn't looked at, or they hadn't looked at in a really long time. It's like, oh, I forgot I could do that. That's, you know, it's a great piece of, you know, advice or a great tip or something like that. Or go learn an editor, like go learn all the ins and outs of Vim or something like that. Then you can participate in all the Vim versus Emacs arguments in the world, but you don't have to be an expert to be a teacher. That's the thing. Sure. Like you can get started, and you'll continue to learn as you continue to teach. Go ahead, Dan.
You know, I just want to say, like, I mean, that's totally true. But I will say, as someone right out of school, you are going to have a different, right? So I can talk about, like, we can talk about the hoary old things that we've seen, right? Like the systems we've seen, but unless it's my bent, I may not be up to date on the latest pedagogical things or pedagogical methods, or the latest like technical things that you've had a chance to play with, because you're starting code school with like greenfield development. So even if it's a technical presentation, I would not be surprised if, unless your senior engineers are always on the technical bleeding edge, which probably means you're a consulting company, because any product company is going to be typically going to be a few iterations back from the bleeding edge. You can bring technical expertise as well. But just to reemphasize Ian's point, like everyone has something to learn and everyone has something to teach.
Yep, for sure. Yep. So don't wait to feel like an expert. If you wait until you feel ready, you'll never do it. I've run into that where you just kind of get this paralysis of like, oh, I'm not ready to do that thing yet. And it's going to hold you back from a lot of things just generally in life. It's like, you don't have to be perfect at it. You just have to put your foot forward and do it.
I will say one other thing before you, you don't have to teach like getting up in front of people either, right? Like YouTube videos, screencasts, blog posts, tweets. Like there's so many different ways for you to do this. Just and do what feels right. So go ahead. Sorry, Ian, I cut you off.
No worries at all. I think a good piece of advice, if you're going to get started on like content creation, I would start with a blog where people can't leave you comments. Because I think that there's still some toxicity out there. But if you put it on YouTube, you put it on Twitter, you're gonna get all the people telling you why you're wrong and you know you're garbage and you're worthless, and that can start to really eat away at your soul. So I would start by producing content where people can't leave a comment, or put it on YouTube and flag it as like, this is kid friendly, so that people can't leave comments. You know, you won't get ad revenue from it, but people also can't leave comments and tell you, you know, why they don't like it and things like that. So there are ways around those kinds of things. But yeah, find a channel that works for you. Find an opportunity that works for you. I love telling new devs, like, go to a meetup and give like a 5-minute, 10-minute lightning talk. You know, Dan and I have both run meetups. We will attest. They will absolutely accept any kind of lightning talk of any kind. Like, finding people to speak at a meetup is hard. And like I was doing the Python meetup like monthly, and I knew people that dropped their meetups back to like every other month or every third month because of how hard it was to find somebody to come and speak on any kind of topic that they chose. Like, literally, come talk about anything about Ruby and you can come speak at my meetup. And then we started seeing meetups where it's like, okay, well, the topic doesn't even have to be about Ruby. Come talk about like your mental health as a developer and the struggles that you face, or come talk about, your interview process with such and such a company, and like, what you thought of it. Like, you can just go give opinion kinds of talks, and those will generally get accepted as well, as long as like you're not like, completely slamming a company or something like that. I don't recommend doing that anyway, but yeah, any kind of talk, like just get up and share what you know. That's the whole theme of my channels. Like, when we share what we know, we all win. And I believe that no matter what it is you're sharing, you're bringing a unique perspective and experience and background into tech. No matter what you're coming from, you are a unique individual, and you're bringing perspectives on things that I wouldn't have thought of, and you're bringing fresh energy into our industry that we desperately need. And hopefully you're not like more white dudes getting into tech. Although if you're a white dude and you're getting into tech, that's fine too. But I love just seeing the non-white dudes getting into tech for sure.
Definitely.
Cool. Keep dropping questions and topics in chat. I'm happy to stay and hang out. Dan, we're kind of over our hour, so I don't know what your time is like, but if people have questions, I'm happy to stay and hang out.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you can just do you have my LinkedIn?
Yeah, so I dropped it in LinkedIn. Hope you don't mind.
Okay, great. Awesome. Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Make sure that when you connect with Dan, that you add a note and say you saw Dan on the stream. It's kind of one of my pet peeves of like people that just like connect with Ian on LinkedIn and they don't say like where they know me from. It's like, well, did you see me on the stream? Did you see me give a talk somewhere? Like, who are you? So try to add a note as much as possible. Crookie Monster added another question. As a recent bootcamp grad, would you suggest just getting our resume out there even if it isn't fully polished? What do you think, Dan?
So the question is kind of, what do you mean by out there, right? Like, I think that nothing is ever fully perfect. And so, again, I think the resume, especially for a new bootcamp grad, should be something that you hand over to someone, ideally someone who already knows who you are, right? So obviously you don't want to hand out a resume that has typos or obvious things in there, but it doesn't need to be perfect either. So I guess I would say, one, build a relationship first. Two, it will never be perfect. So I would, barring, run it through a spell checker, give it to Ian or somebody else and say, hey, is this good? But I don't think let me put it this way. I think people get disqualified with resumes. I don't think people get qualified by resumes, typically, especially newer devs.
Yeah. And one thing that I mentioned when I talk about resumes is as a hiring manager, when I'm looking at a resume, I'm looking for a reason to say no, because I got hundreds of these things to go through, and I'm just like, nope, nope, nope. Oh, this one looks all right. Nope, nope, nope. Yeah, maybe. Nope, nope, nope. But by the time we get to the interview and we're actually interviewing you, we're looking for a reason to say yes, because interviewing sucks and we just want it over with. We just want to find like, who can I hire? I've narrowed that list down to like 10 people. I'm interviewing all of you. I want to hire one of you. So just give me a reason to say yes, and you get the job offer, and then I'm done, right? Because it's a long, expensive process to hire people.
So in that situation, like, would you say you do need to have a perfect resume, or what are the things that are causing you to say no? Obviously, there are the things like typos, or this is a .NET position and they have no .NET experience, and haven't addressed it in the cover letter. But what are the things that cause you to say no?
The biggest thing for me as a hiring manager, I need to see in a hurry, do you have the skill that I'm looking for? Where have you practiced that skill? Like, have you practiced it enough? Right. But it's mostly like, if I'm looking for a particular tech skill match, even if you don't have, excuse me. So for example, at Stream, we hire Go developers. That's like our primary technology. If you don't know Go, it doesn't completely disqualify you from getting an interview, but it's a lot less likely. And so if you make it really hard for me to see on your resume, like you're a polyglot and you know all kinds of programming languages, but you've got your Go projects like buried way down on the page and I've got to go hunt for that, it's a no. Like, I'm scanning that thing in 10 seconds. I need to see in a hurry. Are you a Go developer? What kinds of projects have you built? Do you have professional experience in Go?
Right.
If so, you're on my maybe list, and you're probably going to get at least a phone screen. But if I got to hunt through that thing to find out that you, like, where you know Go or how long you've used Go as a programming language, If you make me work for it, it's a no, because I got so many of these to go through.
Sure. So that's actually interesting. I know we had another question pop up, but like it's another theme here, right? There was a theme of no adults in the room. There's also a theme of like help people help you,
Yeah,
right? And that's
for sure.
exactly what the resume is supposed to do. And so you need to do the research to know that Stream is a Go shop and my company FusionAuth is a Java shop, right? And so you need to tweak your resume. It doesn't need to be perfect, but you got to give them what they're looking for
Yep.
because they're busy.
Yep.
So
And if you don't have the technology, you can still apply for the job as long as there's something relevant on there. Like if you don't know Java, but you know C++, it's close enough. Like, you know, you could probably like get up to speed on Java fairly quickly if you're really proficient in C++. Sure. Same thing with like Python, Ruby, JavaScript. They're all high-level languages. If you know one, you're going to learn the other really quick. Like, yeah, there's some syntactic differences and like different kinds of API calls, but like they're generally the same kind of thing.
right.
Yeah. LaCroix Boy said, oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I just want to say, I mean, again, and that's where like cover letters, as much as I hate cover letters, actually show a ton of value where you can say, hey, actually, I've read your job description. I see it's all Java. I assume you guys are all a Java shop, but I've done C++ and I've built this small little Java project, right? Or I've read this book or something like that. And that again is a way of making you stand out because so many people just like submit, and like aren't customizing their resumes and aren't putting in that extra 15 minutes of effort because it's another 15 minutes of effort. I get that, but that means you should narrow the focus and spend more time rather than submit more. Is my advice. So
I was going to go on to the next question, but now I want to dig into why Dan hates cover letters.
I mean, I just think other than that, actually, I have grown to like them more. I feel like they just need to like convey a lot of they need to convey information. Like the cover letter of like I'm interested in your job is not a useful cover letter to me.
Right.
The cover
You're applying for it. I assume you're interested in the job.
I had a friend who's in HR who gave me some feedback, and she basically said, what you want to do in a cover letter is say, this is why your company is awesome. This is why I'm awesome. This is why I'd be more awesome together. And that's really like those 3 paragraphs are all you need in a cover letter. You don't need like a long like introduction or anything like that. So maybe it'd be fair to say I don't like their bad cover letters aren't very much fun. So
yeah. And I did a whole video recently on how to build a cover letter for the tech industry. It's kind of my thought and my sort of framework that I would follow. You can check that on the YouTube archive. Next question from LaCroix Boy. I pivoted careers and include some technical skills from my previous engineering background. Would you recommend to keep other types of technical skills that are outside of programming, or just limit the resume to the job that I'm applying to? I think you could do a bit of both. Ultimately, that resume needs to show me as a hiring manager the things about your background that are really relevant to my company. And so if something else about your technical background or technical proficiency is relevant to my company or my role in some way, or you think it is, leave it on the resume. I think that kind of stuff is totally fine.
Yeah, I mean, I would even tweak the resume a little bit more, right? And so an example is FusionAuth is an authentication provider. And so if you're a Windows System Administrator, don't just say Windows System Administrator, right? Say, managed LDAP directories, right? Because that is something that like shows me that you're one, committed to the job, right? Because you tweak your resume.
Right.
And then 2, that you have a skill set that is going to be applicable to my needs. If you're applying to a networking company, then you might want to emphasize, I don't know what Microsoft's networking stack is, but that aspect of your previous experience. So I would even tune it further if you can.
Yeah, that's great. James Pro Dev says, our company recently hired 3 associate web devs. One of them is irritating the other web devs. He doesn't do his own troubleshooting or argues minor points, expects the code to be working correctly, doesn't just do the solution that you give him. Any advice on how to deal with that situation? At this point, the other web devs want to give up on him. And so if I understand the question right, you've got someone on the team that's kind of struggling and maybe needs some help, and you're wondering like how to handle that. I think I've kind of answered that already. It sounds like they need someone to kind of like mentor them or coach them a little bit on that kind of stuff. But if they're argumentative and it's like an interpersonal skill, then that's harder to train. And those kinds of things are harder to interview for. Like, are you going to play well on the team with other people? There are interview questions that you can ask to kind of suss out, like, tell me about a time that communication didn't work out and you got blamed for something that you don't think you did. A question like that could be like, oh, I was working on this project with Dan and Dan totally went off the rails on something. It's like, well, did Dan really go off the rails on that, or was it something that you actually caused? Like, we can kind of discern a little bit of that in the interview, by like asking other follow-up questions and kind of see, like, is there correlation in your answers around, like, some of that stuff. But I think, I would say for this particular individual, it sounds like maybe they just need a little bit of coaching around the team communication. So I said earlier in the stream, like, communication leads to trust, and trust leads to better communication, and it's just this cyclical thing. Like, as one gets better, the other's going to get better, and your whole team is going to be like this well-oiled machine. And so I think that there may be some aspect of that. James gave a follow-up, said the other two are good at asking questions and getting help and solving their problems, but this third person is taking up too much time from the rest of the team. I would probably qualify, like, what is too much time? Did they come in on the team knowing that they were maybe a little bit behind, or were they hired where they were expected to have known all these things and be proficient in this stuff? It may be like, hey, you know what? Let's just sit down and reset. Let's go back over some onboarding and kind of the process and principles of our team. This is how we ask questions. This is our expectation of you. Like, yes, we're here to help you learn, and we're here, like, you're going to grow and you're going to learn things here, but you need to show this due diligence yourself, kind of like what Dan and I were talking about. Like, if you want someone to do a code review or something, like, put your question up on Stack Overflow, because that's a really good framework for, like, how to ask a good question and show, like, I've tried the following, I'm getting this as my output, but I expect this as my output. Can somebody help me out? Maybe they need a little bit of coaching and a little bit of instruction on how to work through that. Dan, what advice would you give for, like, a new dev that's kind of facing that, or for a senior dev that's dealing with a junior dev in this scenario?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough situation, right? So I think the first thing is to really kind of have empathy for everyone in the situation. We don't know whether WD3 is doing this because they're behind, or because it's a personality trait, or because, sometimes people get argumentative because they feel threatened, or they're like, I don't really know what I'm doing here, and so this is a way of not lashing out, but, like, coping with it. So I think that the honest truth is, you have a responsibility to this person to give them a fair shot, and you have a responsibility to your team to make sure that the team has a fair shot. Mm-hmm. So if I was in this situation, I'd probably have that reset conversation, and I would set some really clear, firm guardrails and goals, and let them buy into it, right? So it's not like you say, hey, this is what you need to accomplish in 3 months. You say, this is what we want you to accomplish. Do you feel like that's reasonable? What support do you need? And then say, and I think it's okay to be like, hey, this may not be a fit for us, right? And I think you want to be gentle with that, but you want to be clear, and you want to say, we want to help you succeed. So what do you need from us to help you succeed? And then you give them that for 3 months, and then you revisit it 3 months, right? And they may, at the end of this time, say, wow, screw you guys, I'm out. Or they may start interviewing, or they may dig down and, like, meet those expectations. Yep. And it's going to be more work than you probably want to do, right? Because you probably want to just kind of keep the projects moving along. But when you hire an employee, that's what you're getting into.
You're signing up for that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And either way, your team wins. You either lose them as a teammate, or they get better as a teammate. Either way, your team's going to be better for it.
Yep.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard thing to go through. I think a lot of companies kind of follow the mentality of hire slow, fire fast. That, if it's really not working out, let's just rip the Band-Aid off. Like, don't struggle through it for too long. But yeah, I think having that reset conversation could be good. I would say preferably with a team lead, and if that has no effect, like, definitely get a manager involved where there could be disciplinary action tied to it. But I like Dan's advice too. Like, don't put a timeline on it. Just say, this is our expectation. Do you think it's reasonable? Maybe ask them to set a timeline. Like, how soon can you start following this process? Because we're seeing it impact the team, not infect the team, impact the team. And we want to make sure that you succeed. Like, we're here, like, we've hired you to trust that you can do the job. We believe that you can do the job. We believe in you. We want to see you succeed. We're going to help you any way we can. what do you need from us to make that happen?
And I think the timeline is important, but what's important is that you don't just dictate it, right? That it's a mutual discussion.
Absolutely.
And maybe it's 2 months, maybe it's 4 months. You also, I would probably want to have a discussion with the manager to know what because it's going to affect team output. Like, what buffer does your manager have for doing this kind of remediation? But the alternative is you go out and hire another new web developer, right? Because you need that person's skills and their labor. And as Ian said, that's not cost free either, for sure. So.
Yeah. Good times. All right. Well, we're coming up on an hour and a half. If you do have other questions or topics, like, drop them in chat pretty soon. Otherwise, I think we'll start to wrap up. Because Dan, I really appreciate you giving us some of your time. I don't want to keep you on too long.
This has been super fun, but yeah, it is.
So pitch us your book. Tell us more about your book. How can people find your book? How can they read your blog? Tell us more about that.
Sure. Yeah. So, letterstonewdeveloper.com is the website. You can buy the book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or apress.com. And the simplest thing to think of it is it's a way to accelerate your first year to 2 years of software development, or if you are curious about a software development career and kind of wonder what is it really like. I will say that I don't focus on any technical aspects. So if you're looking to learn the latest React or Golang or whatever, then this is not the book for you. But this is a very nice companion book because, as we talked about, software is not built by one person going off into a corner and getting all of the requirements written down and just building stuff out. It's a whole process, and there's coding is in the middle of it, but there's a lot on either side and all around it. So this book is what I wish I had when I started, and all the advice, whether it's, I think there's a little bit of financial advice, there's some life advice, there's a whole chapter on community, which we kind of talked about, and a chapter on learning. And again, to kind of circle back to what I said a while ago, if you weren't on the stream, this is not an encyclopedia, right? This is not going to give you every answer. This is going to give you a little bit of a firm grounding and a place for you to learn hey, this is something I need to know more about. I'm going to do some more research. There's a lot more stuff out there, but I need to know the verbiage to get started.
Yep, that's great. And I actually used some of your financial advice from the book with a mentee of mine who just got a job offer. Signed their job offer actually and sent it back today, and they're like, nice. Yeah, what do I do? Like, how do I pick between a 401k and a Roth, and how much should I invest? I'm like, as much as you can, because you're like early 20s and that'll be worth a crap ton of money by the time you retire. So yeah, I mean, it's like there's this thing is full of really great knowledge. So definitely check out Dan's blog. Like he said, a lot of the letters on the blog are in the book and vice versa. But not all of it, so you still got to buy a copy of the book. But
no, I mean, so the letters on the blog are great. I did revise every single one of them and expand them, but I want people to get this knowledge. So if you can buy the book, awesome. If you can't, please check out the blog and share it. And also, this is one thing. This is so great, Ian, that you get this feedback on the stream. On a blog, you don't get that. So let me know if you find something that really resonates with you, or if you find something that you're like, hey, that actually kind of didn't sound quite right. What do you mean by this? I love to hear about people. Yeah, so this Q&A is really great.
Yep, good deal. And I've shared Dan's Twitter and LinkedIn. It's more DS on all the things, I think, right? Even GitHub, like all the places. Dan tends to use the same username everywhere, so definitely stay in touch with Dan. Dan, again, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Hope to bump into you in Boulder at some point, because I do want to get you to autograph this book for me. I'm gonna bring a Sharpie with me and like keep it in my backpack over the next couple of weeks. But we should just catch up and have some lunch or something too.
That'd be great. That'd be great.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody for joining us on the stream. This is going to go up on YouTube later. If you've made it this far and you've watched it on YouTube, like, subscribe, all the good stuff. You can follow me on Twitch at IanDouglas736, and you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'll drop that and drop in the YouTube again. Let's see what else. Oh yeah, resume review. If you want a resume review, come on, give me a resume. You can anonymize the thing or not. It's at your discretion, but I prefer that you do. I will do free resume reviews on the stream. Let's get some of those queued up. I'd love to get someone like Dan back on the stream and like go over a bunch of resumes and kind of hear like the back and forth on what makes a good resume or not. So,
Or maybe just one, right? If it's someone,
or
if
one,
it's a resume with a lot of discussion, right?
right?
Like you with Jonan. So
Right. You
yeah,
never know. You never know.
that's awesome. That's awesome.
Cool. Well, I appreciate everybody's time, and we'll catch you on Sunday. Sunday is going to be a Q&A session. I've actually got some really deep questions, and I'm actually going to do a lot longer explanation on some of my answers instead of the 3 to 5 minute thing that I usually cap at. The podcast is picking up quite a bit, so extracting that audio and getting into the podcast is actually really helpful to folks. And so I want to expand on some of those questions a little bit more, but some of them are going to be pretty sensitive questions. So come check me out on Sunday, and we'll see you then. Thanks again, Dan, and have a good night, everyone. Let's see who's online right now that we can go raid. Is there anybody we can go raid on Twitch? Midnight Simon's on. Midnight Simon's a good guy to go listen. He's got some really big Fang interviews coming up, and so he is grinding like crazy on algorithms and data structures. So I think we'll go raid Midnight Simon. Aside from that, have a good night, everybody, and we'll see you again on Sunday. We're going to go raid Midnight Simon in about 5 seconds. Thanks again for your time, Dan. We'll catch you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.